On August 1st, 2007, 3 members of a Kenyan family known as the Kurias family were found beaten and bludgeoned to death inside their Powder Springs home in Georgia in the U.S. 2 other members of the family were also badly beaten, but were lucky enough to survive this vicious attack. This case is hands down one of the most harrowing and mysterious cases there is. And nearly 2 decades later, this case remains like a wound that refuses to heal. This is likely because it left behind so many unanswered questions. This is the story of the Kurias, the chilling details of their final days, and the mystery surrounding their horrific murders. Welcome back to the Crime Gist. If you like our crime stories, please consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our episodes. Jane Kurias' story begins in central Kenya, where she was born in the year 1960. She loved books and was very passionate about education and learning. After high school, she enrolled in a local teachers' college to study education. Jane was also known to be very passionate about human rights and gender equality. In particular, she actively spoke and educated communities against the practice of female genital mutilation. And trying to change people's deep entrenched customs was sometimes met with hostility. So, by speaking out against FGM, Jane was obviously treading on murky waters. It was while she was in college that she met Mr. Kurias, the man who would later become her husband and father of her kids. The two quickly fell in love, and in 1987, as soon as she completed her college studies, they got married and settled somewhere in the outskirts of Nairobi. In 1988, 1 year into their marriage, they welcomed their first baby, a baby girl known as Isabella Kurias. They would go on to have their second born, Annabelle Kurias, in 1991, and their last baby, Jeremy Kurias, in the year 2000. Sadly, tragedy struck the following year, 2001, when the man of the house, Mr. Kurias, died of pneumonia. This robbed the family of a great support system and left Jane Kurias to raise the 3 kids alone. Around the same time, their family home was destroyed by a fire under very mysterious circumstances. It was believed that this happened due to Jane's stance on female genital mutilation. Someone must have been after her. After this series of misfortunes, Jane decided to leave Kenya. She managed to secure a visa and relocated to the U.S. that same year, that is 2001. Her travel documents indicated that she sought asylum abroad due to her vocal stand against female genital mutilation in Kenya. She was afraid for her life and that of her kids. When she arrived in the U.S., she first settled in Boston, Massachusetts. The following year, 2002, she moved the family to Powder Springs in Georgia. This is a quiet suburb northwest of Atlanta. Jane decided to move there because she had some family from Kenya living in Powder Springs. This town was also known to have a growing, close-knit Kenyan community. I suppose that Jane wanted to feel more at home and have a supportive community around her. In Powder Springs, Jane and her kids moved into a modest 3-bedroom house on Country Cove Way. Here, the Kurias began rebuilding their life from scratch. The transition was a bit challenging. As an immigrant and single mother, Jane faced cultural barriers and financial struggles. She worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. She took overnight shifts as a nursing aide at a local hospital while working as a caregiver by day, all while ensuring her kids were enrolled in good schools and pursuing their dreams. She was doing all this just so her kids could have a better and brighter future. Jane's life revolved around her children and her faith. Being a staunch Christian, her faith remained her anchor at all times. She was an active member of a local Powder Springs church. Every Sunday, the Kurias attended this church, where Jane sometimes led Bible study groups. The Kurias were well liked by neighbors and members of their church community. Jane was known for her warm smile and willingness to help others. Her children were known to be polite and hardworking, traits instilled by their mother's strong values. By the year 2007, Jane had established a stable life for her family in the U.S. Life seemed to promise brighter days. Her eldest daughter, Isabella Kuria, now 19 years of age, was attending college. She was balancing her nursing classes with volunteer work at a local clinic. The middle kid, Annabelle Kuria, who was 16 years of age, was set to start her senior year in high school. Shy but fiercely intelligent, Annabelle dreamt of becoming a human rights lawyer. In her free time, she helped babysit neighbors' kids and also volunteered in their local church. Jeremy, now 7 years of age, was enrolled in elementary school. He was full of energy and loved playing soccer with his friends. And the girls were the best big sisters to Jeremy. They were always happy to drop off and pick up their little brother from school and help him with homework. They were also a big help to their mom and the community of Powder Springs as well. Talk of well-raised kids. Jane, now a certified nurse, was still working 2 jobs, at a local hospital and a nursing home. But even with the long hours of work, every Sunday the family always attended church without fail. By the time the summer of 2007 rolled in, life was looking pretty good for the family. Sadly, they had no idea that this would be their last summer as one big happy family. Their dreams and the peaceful lives they had carved for themselves in the US were all about to be cut short in a very vicious way. On Monday, July 30th, 2007, Jane Kuria got a visitor at her home on Country Cove Way. It was her sister-in-law, Pauline Thande. She was accompanied by her 10-year-old son, Peter Thande. Pauline spent a couple of hours with Jane, cooking, eating, and catching up. As the adults talked, the kids Jeremy and Peter were playing outside. Afterwards, when it came time for Pauline to leave, her son didn't want to leave with her. Peter wanted to have more time playing and hanging out with his cousin Jeremy. He asked his mom, Pauline, if he could sleep over at Jane's house that night, to which Pauline agreed. So, she left her son with the Kurias, knowing that he was in safe hands. Peter and Jeremy played outside all evening before finally falling asleep in Jeremy's room that evening. The next day, the evening of 31st July, Pauline tried calling Jane to check on her son, but received no answer. Concerned but not alarmed, she assumed Jane might be busy with work or errands. However, by the next morning, 1st of August, Pauline grew increasingly worried when repeated calls went unanswered. That Wednesday morning, Pauline decided to go to Jane's home to check on the family and see what was going on. She was accompanied by Jane's niece, who lived nearby, known as Diana Minor. When they arrived at the house at around 10 a.m., they noticed that Jane's and Isabella's cars were parked in the driveway. Also, they found the back door unlocked. This immediately struck them as unusual, since Jane was very meticulous about locking up. As Diana stepped inside the house ahead of Pauline, she froze in horror upon seeing a pool of blood on the floor near the entrance to the living room. Panicked and trembling with fear, she ran outside to call the police while Pauline remained near the doorway. When minutes later the police arrived at the Kuria residence, they uncovered one of the most gruesome crime scenes Powder Springs had ever witnessed. Near the front door entrance, they found the lifeless body of 19-year-old Isabella Kuria. Isabella had been beaten and bludgeoned multiple times. Investigators noted signs of struggle, but no evidence of SA. In the kitchen, they found Jane Kuria. Her body bore multiple blunt force injuries consistent with being struck repeatedly by a blunt object. Defensive wounds on her indicated that she had fought fiercely against her attacker. Found in her bedroom upstairs was the middle child, 16-year-old Annabelle Kuria. Her injuries were similar to those sustained by Jane and Isabella. Blood trails suggested that Annabelle may have tried fleeing before being cornered by the attacker. Found unconscious but alive in Jeremy's bedroom were 7-year-old Jeremy Kuria and his cousin, 10-year-old Peter Thande. Both boys had suffered crazy head injuries. They were airlifted to a hospital in critical condition and unconscious. Investigation into the murders began immediately. However, they faced numerous challenges. First, no murder weapon was ever found at the scene. But, based on the evidence, forensic experts later determined that the weapon must have had a tapered or forked end, like a crowbar. Also, despite extensive forensic analysis at the crime scene, investigators found no fingerprints or DNA belonging to anyone outside of the household. The absence of eyewitness accounts further complicated efforts to identify suspects. None of the neighbors had heard or witnessed anything out of the ordinary on that night. Now, the investigators' only hope was the surviving boys. They had to wait for the boys to get out of coma and give them an account of what they had witnessed. Jeremy came to a week later, but unfortunately could not recall any details about what happened on July 31st due to trauma-induced memory loss. When the second boy, Peter, woke up, he remained similarly unable to provide useful information about the attack. Their memories were badly affected by the events of July 31st. Realizing that they wouldn't get much information from the boys, the experts attempted to reconstruct the crime scene themselves. It was believed that the assailant attacked the family on the night of 31st July. He had entered through the door like someone who knew the family. He was possibly let in by Jane. The kitchen table suggested that they may have sat down for a snack. It was believed that Jane was then attacked and beaten to death. She fought hard for her life as indicated by the defensive wounds on her, but ultimately she lost. Isabella, on hearing her mom scream, ran downstairs to check on her, but was cornered and bludgeoned to death. Annabelle, who was by now hiding in her bedroom after hearing the commotion, was found, dragged out, and killed as well. The killer then went into Jeremy's room, where it's believed that the young boys were cowering in their bed. Peter later recalled hearing some footsteps, but lost consciousness after the first blow. The boys later woke up in hospital, with their lives having changed forever. Investigators who were left to unravel the mystery debated on what could have happened. Was this a case of a botched robbery, or was it some kind of personal vendetta? They found that Jane's purse was missing some money, so maybe it could have been a robbery gone wrong. However, after keenly looking at the evidence, they believed that the nature of the killing seemed like a crime of passion. It was likely committed by someone who knew the family. The brutality of the crime suggested deep rage. The unfortunate thing is, even after combing through the whole house, they didn't find any evidence or DNA of anyone else outside of the family. The killer's ability to not leave evidence implied that some careful planning went into committing this crime, like the killer could have been wearing gloves. The murder weapon too was not found, meaning that the killer probably came in with the weapon and left with it. Whoever this person was, it was clear that he had come into this home with the full intent to kill. During investigations, a few names popped up as persons of interest. The first was a guy identified only as Patrick. Police learned that Jane Kurias had been speaking regularly with this man for weeks before the murders occurred. Patrick was a Kenyan man living in Powder Springs and a member of the same church as the Kurias. He was a married man with 2 kids. However, evidence suggested a very close relationship with Jane, with constant daily communication between the two. They would have between 10 to 15 calls every day. That July alone, there were over 300 calls between them. But something that struck investigators as suspicious is that there were no calls from Patrick from 31st July and onwards. Why hadn't he called her on that entire day? It was suspected that this was because he was planning the murders and knew that Jane would be normal. Again, it was discovered that Patrick owed Jane $5,000 US, which she had loaned him. When questioned, he admitted to this debt, but said that he and Jane were good friends and she had never pressured him to pay back the money. Another suspicious thing about this guy was that he was one of the neighbors that Jane's daughter, Annabelle, babysat for, and it was suspected that he was pursuing an inappropriate relationship or was grooming the 16-year-old, leading up to this tragedy. Whenever Annabelle babysat his 2 young sons, Patrick would pay her, not through money, but through taking her out for lunches and dinners. A theory suggests that Jane found out about his bad intentions with Annabelle and confronted him, leading to him eliminating her. But that remained as just that, a theory. It was noteworthy that Patrick worked during the day while his wife worked at night. On the night of 31st July, he claimed that he was home alone, so he had no alibi for that night. However, they found no concrete evidence linking him to the crime, and so he was never arrested. Another person of interest was a woman known as Elizabeth, who attended the same church as the Kurias. This lady acted very suspiciously after the murders. She immediately attempted to gain custody of Jeremy without proper authorization or consent from the rest of his extended family. She claimed that Jane would have wanted her to be his guardian. However, for the few days she had Jeremy, she was very hard on him and tried to isolate him from everyone. She even went ahead and started disposing some of Jane's assets just days after the murders. She was also questioned, but nothing ever came out of it. The only connection between the 2 persons of interest was that they both attended Jane's church. However, there was no sufficient evidence to pin them to the murders, and so no arrests were ever made. As weeks turned into months, the leads in this case dried up quickly. Investigators struggled to establish a motive for such brutal killings, given Jane's reputation as a kind-hearted woman who had no known enemies. As of today, 18 years after these horrific events, this case remains unsolved. Advances in forensic technology have yet to yield new insights into identifying the suspects. Powder Springs Police Department continues classifying this case as inactive but reopenable. As for the 2 survivors of that horrible night, they live on but with both visible and invisible scars. Jeremy Kurias grew up without his mother and sisters and under the shadows of this unresolved case. I cannot begin to imagine what it's like knowing that someone who killed your entire family is still out there somewhere. After these deaths, Jeremy moved back to Kenya to live with his grandma. But as a result of that day, he suffered damage that affected his memory and speech. He even had a brain tumor that has since been removed. Now he's 25 and well. In recent interviews, he has mentioned that he remembered a little about that night. He has a faint memory that the man who attacked his family was dressed in an African print shirt. His cousin Peter Thande and his family also returned to Kenya after that ordeal. Both Jeremy and Peter have tried to move on with their lives. As for the Powder Springs community, they are still haunted by that chilling crime. Members of Powder Springs Church community hold annual vigils honoring the memory of the Kurias. They do this while urging authorities not to abandon efforts towards solving this cold case. And I agree, justice delayed need not be justice denied. As AI and genetic genealogy advances, let's keep hope alive that someday the killer will be exposed. But until then, the Kurias, your light still shines. You are forever remembered, cherished, and dearly missed by your loved ones. Our hearts go out to anyone and everyone who was affected by this tragedy. As usual, please do not forget to subscribe, to like, and to share this episode with other true crime junkies like yourself. I'll see you right here on the next one.